it's just a joy to be in his presence. So I know that you will be blessed by him today.
Thank you. So good to be here, Reverend Celeste. This precious place, it holds a charge, can change a life, can light a spark. An open heart is what it asks, paying forward, giving back. Imagine more, and from that seed, it cannot help but come to be. It cannot help but come to be. You step on stage, you take command, you feel the privilege of the platform where you stand. Your message flies, and then it lands upon the open hearts delivered to your hands. Imagine more, and from that seed, it cannot help but come to be. It cannot help but come to be. Sing along. Look what we have created. 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 Imagine more, and from that seed, it cannot help but come to be. It cannot help but come to be. It cannot help but come to be.
Thank you so much for that, Sky. That was amazing. Welcome to Virtual SpeakEasy. I am Beth Gordon. I'm a spiritual leader here at SpeakEasy. I'm vice president of the board, and I facilitate Maiden Voyage with Maureen Muldoon and 7 Keys to the Kingdom in the affirmative prayer class. And I am so blessed to be a part of this international community of extraordinary teachers. We are a place to take a class and to teach a class, and we have a lot of offerings here. And Mari's going to tell you a little bit about that later, but it is really great to be here with you in community this morning. And if this is your first time, welcome. And if this is your second time, welcome back. And we really hope that you will make this your spiritual home. We are a global community that honors the Divine Mother and follows A Course in Miracles. And we see you as a unique expression of love, peace, and creativity, the living embodiment of the divine. Today, we're continuing our Mother series. The first week, we had Mia Sarah, who gave a very heartwarming talk on miracles, which was the M of Mother. And last week, we had Reverend Elizabeth Keats talk on openness, which was the O of Mother. And she did that beautiful experience with Byron Katie's The Work. And today, we have the T of Mother with Reverend Celeste Frazier, who's going to give the talk today on truth. And she's a powerful spiritual teacher. We have a treat today with our own Reverend Celeste Frazier, and many of you probably already know her. She is the host for SpeakEasy's Culture Club, and she's also a teacher of A Course in Miracles on the Saturday Morning Miracles Live 365 daily calls, and she's given other talks here. But here are some other things that you may not know about her. She is a spiritual leader, and she's been a leader of at least 3 other spiritual communities that I'm aware of. And she's a frequent guest speaker and facilitator across the country. She has a digital ministry with her podcast, Mystic Magic. And Reverend Celeste is a diversity facilitator. She facilitates visioning workshops in churches as well as for individuals and corporations. And she teaches many other spiritually transformational courses and workshops. And she's a concerned community activist with a global consciousness. She remains active in community outreach. And in addition, she has books. She's an author. She has written Divine Work Play and In Spirit, in Love. She's also a contributing author to several anthologies. She has contributed her writing to Agape's Inner Visions, to Creative Thought magazine, to Creative Thinking and the Science of Mind magazine. And she's working on her next book called Common Miracles, Frequent Illusions, that will come out in early 2022. And I would add that my personal experience is that she is an amazing prayer. You want to have prayer with this woman. And she just holds such a big, beautiful consciousness. So please give a warm welcome to Celeste Frazier.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was very kind of you.
Not today.
Well, you know, some of you might have noticed that this show is back on the air, that used to be on the air when I was a kid. And it's called To Tell the Truth. Y'all know that show? Well, the interesting thing about that show is that celebrities have to guess between 3 people. And they have to ask questions in order to determine who the real person is and to reveal the 2 imposters. Well, the imposters will win money based on their ability to fool the panel into thinking that they are the person that they are not. Interestingly enough, we're able to fool ourselves into thinking that we are someone else too. Although we may not be conscious of it, it happens. We're even able to convince ourselves that we are not brilliant, kind, successful, creative, or deserving of our good. Now I'm going to pose a question. I want to ask everybody, and you can raise your hand or you can wave or whatever. How many people know what truth is? I don't see anybody raising their hand. Oh, okay. Was that you, Joni? Okay, well, maybe you should be giving the talk.
I knew that was a catch.
Well, you know, one definition of truth is that which is, and I absolutely agree. It's a little vague in terms of being able to understand what that is. Another definition says it's the reason, cause, and power in and through everything. I also agree with that. Now, there's one definition of truth that says, by a process of axiomatic reasoning, we arrive at the conclusion that spirit knows nothing outside of itself. Well, there's the science of mind for you, giving you yet another quandary to unravel, but perhaps I can help. Who here knows the truth about themselves? Looking around the room. Joni's the only one nodding, I see.
Yeah. Sky.
You know, oh, okay, I missed Sky.
Learning the truth.
Knowing the truth about yourself.
And Beth.
Is, okay, very good. Knowing the truth about yourself isn't always easy though. But if you said yes to that, then you should get on the speaking schedule too. But as for me, I am constantly learning the truth about me. That's the truth with a small t. And I'll talk more about the difference in upper and lower case later. Here's what I've been discovering. each one of us has a different idea about that which is. You know, when you say that which is, it could be, you know, I saw it from one angle, someone else saw it from a different angle. And that's probably why juries consist of more than 4 or 5 people. Because depending on the set of circumstances that you were brought up in, where you currently live, or who you're surrounded by, your perceptions will vary. And that doesn't even get into where you are in religion, spirituality, or philosophy, or what your occupation is, or what your race is. Yet all of these variables have an influence on how we see the world. It also has to do with our perceptions of ourselves. Ultimately, how we perceive anything has to do with our experience, including what we have learned. And when you reach a certain age, you may notice that you trade in certain beliefs for others. That takes surrender. I mean, I remember telling my dad when I was a preteen that I didn't want to live past 50. Obviously, I have different thoughts about that now. So I'm well past 50. But we may have to really know that there's something greater that we can have, and then be willing to let go of something lesser. When we're younger, we may require a fight in order to let go of a belief. We may be convinced that somebody else's ideas are antiquated. Like I can't convince my nephew to get the COVID shot, right? It's like he's got all of these arguments and all of these reasons that he thinks make sense, right? And so we all have an opportunity on a day-by-day, even a moment-by-moment basis to have a fresher outlook on life. We may have an idea that we're smarter or more knowledgeable than the person who has a different point of view. And these are secondary to the fact that we have yet to discover what we really do believe until we're faced with a challenge that seems formidable. Now, these tragedies can look like tragedies. You know, there's been a lot of death. They may look like infractions. It may look like, you know, an ego struggle at work. We may feel violated by someone else in a romantic situation. We may feel like someone has infringed on our space that we didn't give them permission to have, infringed on our bodies or our beliefs even. And more often, we make assumptions about what we think is true. Assumptions. You know what they used to tell you, what assumptions are. Assume is making an A of you and me. Now, even though I hope for something better, and I may be under the belief, for example, that our justice system is flawed, and I have a community of people who will agree with me that this is true, and there'll be another community who will not believe that it is true at all. They would think that everything is just perfectly fine. But what I am basing that on, except with a few exceptions, I'm basing that on disappointments. I'm basing that on an instance or several instances where I've been discouraged, where I've been disheartened or dismayed, or all of that, right? We form beliefs from our pain. It's those beliefs that make us a little bit skittish about maybe getting into a relationship, right? Those pains that we've experienced may even intimidate us into not even thinking that we want to drive. Maybe perhaps we were in a bad car accident. There are things that we have limited ourselves from doing and ways that we've limited ourselves from seeing based on previous experiences. And yet there's so much more to life than that. We may even give up the idea that the possibilities for something greater still exist. And I'm inviting you to just hold your vote on that. Maybe the jury's still out on that. Maybe there's something more that is possible. Now, I have formed beliefs about myself unconsciously based on whether or not I was accepted or rejected for a relationship, for a job, for something, whatever it was that I wanted to have. And although I worked on myself over the last 20 years, I can still discover moments when I was able to see how I self-sabotage, when I sell myself short or think smaller than my genius, my talents, my goodness. When I have believed a lie that said I was not good enough, no one needed to be present to say it because I had already internalized it, right? I can remember being in practitioner training. This goes way back. This goes back to like, I don't know, 2002 or 3 or something like that. And I remember how I had been seeing another one of my classmates have a spiritual breakthrough. And I was like, I want mine, right? But it wasn't something that you could just call forth. It wasn't something that you could just make on demand happen, right? But it was something that was very spontaneous. And I'll talk more about that later. Truth points to freedom. That's what Ernest Holmes tells us. And I used to think that freedom was something that only children know, right? Like, oh, to be a kid again and be wishing that you were a kid and you didn't have this to deal with and that responsibility or whatever it might be. When I think about my childhood, my moments of freedom were few and far in between, moments of uncertainty and embarrassment and fear. When those freedom moments came, like dancing with my buddy, I was in my joy. But in a moment of laughing at the class clown, I was hedged between appropriate and sacrilegious when the president was killed. The boy behind me made fun of the boy who was crying, and I laughed at his ridicule. But then everybody turned around and started looking at me like they thought I was laughing because the president had been killed. And I'm telling you, decades later, I was on the phone with Jackie Onassis because it was a business call. And somehow in the back of my mind, I thought she knew of that moment because the shame had stayed with me for like 30 years and a little bit beyond that. I finally did let that go. But I thought I was free to be me as a child, except maybe when a babysitter would punish me or my mom or dad would use corporal punishment. But I can remember moments of freedom singing the soundtrack of Julie Andrews movies or dancing for grown-ups at a party. It was only times of like music and writing and laughing when I really felt free. I now know that truth and freedom is not just for children. Perhaps it's for the mature adult who's been heartbroken by the rejection of a crush or the infidelity of a partner or the termination of a pregnancy. And as I continue to grow, having experienced those things, I learned that freedom is a thing to be uncovered, not simply by reading a book or hearing a talk, but by how I apply a truth principle to my life. Back then, I only saw truth principles when all of my mental approaches fell short. My emotional approaches without spiritual wisdom were short-lived and weak. Simply being vulnerable without using vulnerability as a doorway to freedom is like the difference between Popeye without spinach and Popeye with spinach. We simply don't have the power without the presence. Now, I definitely sought God as a preteen, and the perfect connection with the presence was real in the 6th grade. But in the 7th grade, I was slapped in the face by a nun for being the keeper of the pornographic newspaper designed by the collective imaginations of pre-adolescent imaginings in the crux of puberty. My divine connection was clearly no match for the carnal exploration of 12-year-olds. And on I danced, seeking to navigate the physical with both spiritual and immature thoughts. And while I did my best to express freedom, I was not at all free. The confines of being a non-adult kept my expressions limited. I tried to push the boundaries with alcohol, drugs, and a dance between non-exclusive dating and intimacy while seeking a lifelong connection. I was freely expressing, but without expressing freedom. Insecurity, judgment, and separation kept me bound. I needed to have a spiritual foundation in order to be free. In the baptismal pool, I thought I knew a greater, deeper connection because I was able to feel the Christ consciousness. I was able to feel the oneness. But even that second baptism was short-lived in keeping me committed to practicing the presence. I was really never told how to practice the presence. I was merely taught to pay homage to the presence. And it took me another 20 plus years to move beyond some of the worst mistakes of my life before embarking on a path of spiritual devotion and subsequently true freedom. Henceforward, parental authority, governmental authority, religious authority, and any other pseudo authority could never lead me to my true authority, my inner voice. And it was this authority that satisfied the cravings of my soul. It wasn't until I fell flat on my face in my career aspirations that I allowed myself to consider surrender as an option. The truth is, until we aspire to what is God ordained, we can never really know the exciting adventure of evolution, the assuredness of true power, and an easy access to higher possibilities. Until I let God take the lead, I was not able to let go of failures in order to seek that which would never fail me. This is the first step toward real transformation. If you haven't seen Halle Berry's new movie, Bruised, I invite you to see it. Spoiler alert, until you experience the thing that you cannot tolerate, you will not step into your big girl panties or your big boy pants. Because when you've reached the lowest point, and when someone you love, including you, is in danger, you will do all that you can. And it is then, and only then, will you accomplish self-respect. Self-respect that perhaps seemed so impossible, even though you might have been faking it for other people. And the other thing that you will find is peace. Now, when I was a young preteen and had thoughts about ministry, the ideals of serving God and being a beacon for humanity came from an eclipsed view of both God and humanity. I didn't understand that the connection between God and humanity was already available. I knew a little bit about God and a little bit about humanity. However, I never considered that it had everything to do with my relationship with God and my relationships with people. While I already had a personal relationship with God, I still had the trappings of religiosity shadowing my view. But as I moved into New Thought and that philosophy and way of life, I grew to know more about ideals, false morality, and the truth beyond iconic symbols. Ironically, sexuality was the topic in practitioner training when my spiritual breakthrough occurred. There, in the midst of uncovering false beliefs about intimacy, I found an intimacy with myself. It was then that I significantly discarded the sexism, the racism, the homophobia, all of those internalizations that had kept me bound, enslaved by these imaginary forces. Even though those people had faces, they were too numerous to be able to delineate where the source of any of it was, but it was no longer belonging to them because it was living inside of me. And it was then that I began anew on a path of freedom to reveal truth. I did realize that I may not be able to stop your hatred toward me, but I can stop my hatred toward me. And that only took me 45 years to learn. And it's not like the hatred from others have stopped. Not at all. It's not that it's even stopped hurting, but the internalization of it was simply no longer an option. I wouldn't allow it anymore. And that is what truth points to freedom means to me. Somewhere around the early 2000s, I began to discover A Course in Miracles. And those lessons resonated me in a way that was personal. The principles were very familiar to a dimension in me because I was able to reclaim an authority that I never knew I had. And while I uncovered the divine in me as an intrinsic and very real power, the body of principles and lessons felt like a reunion to my soul. And incredibly, each year I study it, I continue to learn. Each time I start with nothing I see means anything, I peel away another layer of illusions and separations. And to this day, I'm still reviewing video lessons that I taught 2 years ago to refresh my memory and remind myself of the level of awareness that I can access easily and effortlessly. So a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was, when the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict came out, and I was teaching that Saturday morning with Maureen, that I had this discovery that this whole thing that I had in my head about who I now know to be Wendy Rittenhouse, his mother, was really not about her at all. And while I was able to come up with this, I'll say, guess, because it really wasn't anchored in any truth. It wasn't until later that I realized it wasn't even factually true. But my perception was that she had driven this boy to a city, another state, and that he was carrying a gun in the car. Well, I later found out that she didn't take him at all. And according to her, she didn't even know where he was that night. And I realized, well, wait a minute, this is not about her. This is not about Kyle. This is not about his recklessness. This is about, where am I being reckless? This isn't about how dare you hurt other people. This is about how I have hurt other people and how I have hurt myself. And so all of these triggers just simply give us an opportunity to point back to ourselves. I came to realize that, yes, there was a bigger system at place around both the Rittenhouse trial as well as the Ahmaud Arbery murderers trial. You know, it wasn't simply about the dynamics of these individuals, that there was a bigger idea that has been running and has been running for centuries. And while I was looking at Wendy Rittenhouse, perhaps with a privilege in one way, and that's still true for her simply by the color of her skin, I didn't realize that perhaps the day when Kyle was turning himself in, that she only had $1.20 in her bank account. That doesn't make anybody more or less guilty or innocent. But what I did know is that in order for there to be a $2 million cash bond, it had to come from somebody else. And it came from people who have a fear. It came from people who, yes, on the books are wealthy, that those numbers of zeros don't even add up to anything that many of us will see at any given time in one moment, except for, you know, when I become fabulously wealthy, of course. But, you know, I didn't know that even though I had this perception, they later found pictures of her with, or pictures of Kyle with the Proud Boys. There was a different mindset. It's the mindset that went into our Capitol building on January 6th. It was a mindset of holding on to a past that seemed to be fleeting away so quickly, that the desperation was so great to hold on to that it was by any means necessary. And although Malcolm X used those words in the early 60s, it was never with these kinds of outcomes in mind. And then what I realized was that this boy was dyslexic, Kyle. He had dropped out of school. He wasn't very successful in school. He wasn't that bright. And the boy who bought the gun for him is the boy he was hanging out with. And so all of this mindset around fear means that there was no perception of truth whatsoever moving through the minds of these young boys. I'm not even going to call them men because I have a whole different definition for what a man is. And I looked at Ahmaud Arbery, who is this young man who was working on houses and doing electricity and wiring and probably looking in that house for how he would imagine designing it. I don't know. When I look at his mother, they weren't able to pinpoint her into this perception of being a single mother. She was not, while Kyle Rittenhouse's mother was, right? So Wanda Cooper Jones is a married woman. And Ahmaud was her youngest son, who she had to watch go through this whole victimization all over again in terms of how long his toenails were. But what we found in this is that truth is still available. And when we keep pushing, justice does prevail. And so whatever the hate crime laws are and whatever the citizens arrest laws that have been repealed, that's evidence of how truth is able to rise above the madness. And it's absolute truth that the consciousness of truth is something that is available to us all. And so when we look at this theme of come to mama, we can know that the truth about mothers is that they don't have all the answers, but they have every reason to do everything that they possibly can for love. And that's not just limited for mothers, because we know that we have the same divine qualities that every mother has. That nurturing, that nourishing, that openness, that need to take care of. And it doesn't simply stop with children. It's for everybody who's in our lives. And so what we get to know is that even though there may be politics around how people are accelerating and how they're making these choices about guns and all of that, there's a greater truth that is within each of us that knows the sanctity of life, that knows the beauty of connection, and that knows the very spirit of generosity. It's not simply to bail someone out, but to simply know that the love that we have is not limited to anyone, but it's for everyone. And so I'm accepting for all of us that we keep looking until we see nothing but the truth. While we're able to discard the misperceptions about ourselves, then we're able to see others clearer. When we're able to release those things that seem to bind us, then we're able to move deeper into loving. And you have one test, the Course tells us. And that's the test by which to recognize if what you learned is true. If you are wholly free of fear of any kind, and if all of those that you meet or even think of share in your perfect peace, then you can be sure that you've learned God's lesson. Unless all this is true, there are dark lessons in your mind that hurt and hinder you and everyone around you. And the absence of perfect peace means that you think you do not will for God's child what the divine wills for you. Now, each time I think I've got it all figured out, there's always something more for me to know. I don't think I'm special, though I might be. but I do know the truth will free you, just as it continues to liberate me. I invite you to keep seeking it. Namaste.
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Reverend Celeste. I have so many things that I want to ask you, and I'm just inviting everyone to, like, what are your questions? What are your comments? What inspired you? Because we're going to get to the conversation. But first, I believe Sky is going to do another song for us.
Yay.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Thank you for that beautiful message. I'm gonna live in love. I'm gonna do what it takes to let go. I'm gonna take my seat and let love run the show. Everything that I look at, I get attached. But I'm not gonna give weight to the wounds of my past. When it's me that will lose if I choose to resent what I have. But since I've got another chance, I'm gonna live in love. I'm gonna do what it takes to let go. I'm gonna take my seat and let love run the show. Everything that I look at, I get sucked in. And I'm already miles beyond it by the time I begin. And the details of the moment are already the past. And since I've got another chance, I'm gonna live in love. I'm gonna do what it takes to let go. I'm gonna take my seat and let love run the show. I'm gonna hold your heart as precious as anything that I know. I'm gonna take my seat and let love run the show. I'm gonna live in love. I'm gonna do what it takes to let go. I'm gonna take my seat and let love run the show. Yeah, I'm gonna hold your heart as precious as anything that I know. And I'm gonna take my seat and let love run the show. I'm gonna take my seat and let love run the show.
Gorgeous. I have like tears in my eyes. Thank you so much for that, Sky.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Between Reverend Celeste's message and your music, I'm like, oh, really feeling the depth and the wisdom and the truth. So,
We're a
mission
good team.
accomplished. Yeah, really good team.